Okay, guys, here we go. Let's see. Why is there that glare? That's not good. Why is there that glare? Is that better? I guess a little bit. Okay. So now we're moving on to chapter 6, which is about uh, learning and performance management. So first we talk about learning, obviously, then we're going to talk about performance management. Learning and performance management is something that I assume you guys are familiar with. You've had some kind of performance review at work. Usually happens annually or maybe every 6 months, depending upon when you start your job. Okay, so learning is a change in behavior acquired through experience. So the experience can come in different ways. So we talk about two different types of conditioning. Classical conditioning is basically this idea of modifying behavior by pairing a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus to elicit an unconditioned response. So the famous experiment with that was Pavlov and the dog, that every time that they would ring the bell and the dog would eat, that they was getting food, and the dog's mouth would water and that kind of thing, and then they would this idea that they would ring the bell and the bell would respond would elicit this response that they would start to get hungry. So the idea that you hear something or you see something and then it all of a sudden it triggers this response in your body. Okay, operant conditioning is this idea that you modify behavior through positive or negative consequences. So the positive consequence is something that people find pleasurable. Negative consequence is that you find attractive or subversive to something. Hang on. Here you go. I'm sorry, aversive, not subversive. My mistake on that one. So you know that if you go to work on time, maybe you'll get every day you won't get written up. Or the negative consequence is that you will get written up, and as a consequence of getting written up, you get points taken off in your file or whatever. You get something taken away, or you're asked to do something that you don't want to do. All right. So there's this idea of reinforcement, punishment, and extinction. So reinforcement, this idea that you want to have desirable behavior by giving positive consequences or withdrawing negative or withholding negative consequences. So the negative consequence might be having to work on the weekends. So the reinforcement would be if you get these projects done within a certain period of time, you don't have to come in on Saturday. That would be reinforcement by withholding a negative consequence, or bestowing a positive consequence that if you finish it, then you get 2 extra hours of comp time or something like that. Punishment discourages it by the just opposite, bestowing a negative consequence, having to come in on the weekend or work late, or withholding some sort of positive consequence. So the punishment would be, well, you get docked pay or whatever it may be. And then extinction is essentially you don't put any kind of consequence. No consequence to it at all. So you just ignore it. Okay. So there's also this whole idea that there's learning and personality differences. That they talk about that in the book a little bit, and this idea that we talked. I think it's in chapter 2, or chapter 3. I can't remember which. And we talked about personality, the big 5 personality traits, and the Myers-Briggs and that kind of thing. That there's people are going to respond to things based on their personality, not necessarily not everyone responds in the same way. And so there's the intuitors and the sensors. That's how they gather information. The decision makers, the thinkers, the feelers. That learning occurs if you try to give a sensor information that is more theoretical, then they're probably not going to respond as well to it as the intuitors would. Okay, so we'll talk about setting goals at work. So the bullets on here are kind of odd. I'm sorry about that. So you establish desired results that guide and direct behavior in terms of you set a goal that they goals help to crystallize the sense of purpose and mission that you need to have at work, that people need to have. You need to have a goal. You need to know what you're working for. So there are characteristics of effective goals. We call them SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So it has to be specific. So can't be something like, I want to graduate from college. It has to be, you want to graduate from college, you want to get a 2-year degree from ECC within the next, 3 semesters, and you can measure that. Is it attainable? Whether or not it's attainable depends upon how much else you have going on, or if you're working, or how much money you have to pay for it. Is it realistic? Can you get a degree from ECC in 4 semesters? Well, yeah, you can. Would be unrealistic to say you want to get a 2-year degree in 3 semesters. And then time bound, you need to be able to give a specific end date. That's so. We talk about these SMART goals so that when you complete a goal, you can actually tell whether or not you've actually done it. Okay, so what's the point of setting goals? It increases motivation and performance. It reduces the stress you have because you're clear about what it is you're supposed to be achieving, and it improves accuracy. If you know exactly what you're trying to do, you're going to do it. If it's a little vague about what you're supposed to achieve, you might not get it done. Okay, so generally speaking, it's a way that higher the goal is, the better the performance is going to be. Remember we talked before about one of the barriers to perception is self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you believe someone can do it, then they're probably going to do it. But what's important is that the employee participates in the goal setting, that the supervisor is committed to it, and this whole idea that there's some sort of useful performance feedback so you can tell how you're doing on it. Okay, goals reduce role stress. So again, the expectations are completely understood, and it's easier to communicate. Okay. MBO is management by objective. It's this idea that there's a negotiation between the employees and the manager, and it says specifically what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. So you know what your objectives are, and both people are involved in the process. Okay. Performance management, we talked about briefly, I mentioned it in the beginning of this chapter. The defining, measuring, appraising, providing feedback on, and improving performance. It's something that you agree upon together. You set out what your goals are going to be, and then at the end of the year, or the quarter, or 2 quarters, whatever, you decide. You sit down with your boss, and you decide if it's happened. Okay, so here we go. You define the performance in behavioral terms. You measure it. You give feedback, and then you strive for improved performance. Okay, so a performance appraisal is the evaluation of someone's performance. Provides feedback again, identifies developmental needs, decides on promotions and rewards, or it also may decide on demotions or terminations. And it helps to develop information about the organization in terms of selection and process. So, do we have the right employees? Who's the right employee for that specific job? That kind of thing. Okay, so this idea of the actual performance and the measured performance. So we wanted to make sure that there's reliability. We can talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so communicating performance feedback, you have to have specific examples, and you have to focus on changeable behaviors, because not all behaviors necessarily are changeable. That could be the responsibility of the person or the organization if you don't have the resources, or maybe it's against the law, or maybe there's no regulation for it. Before you go into the session, both the supervisor and the employee should be able to plan and organize, and you always begin a performance appraisal with something positive. Okay, so 360 feedback is self-evaluation that 360 degrees, as you know, a circle is 360 degrees. So, traditionally, performance appraisals were done just by, your boss to worker, whereas a 360-degree feedback looks at everybody, your manager, your peers, your direct reports, sometimes customers. I'm sure everybody has seen this, that people behave differently around different people. Sometimes there can be an employee who's a real suck up to the boss and treats everybody around them, their peers, terribly, or might treat the people who report to them terribly. And so the idea of the 360 is it gives a more accurate look. Okay, so there are some sources of feedback on 360 degree. There's a self-evaluation, the manager, the customer, the peer, and then the direct reports. Okay, so in this whole idea of performance appraisal, supervisors have responsibilities and the employee has responsibility too. The supervisor has to provide some sort of coaching and development. They have to be open to changes, always be in a position of responsibility. They need to be empathetic, try to understand what's going on, and encourage the employees to talk to them about what they want to do. And then the employee should take responsibility for their growth and their development themselves. They have to bring something to the table as well. It's not just up to the supervisor. They should ask the supervisor, for future development and improvement opportunities, and be able to express what their interests are. Okay, so effective appraisal systems, there's this validity, reliability, responsiveness, flexibility, and equitableness. So validity, does it capture the dimensions of the person's job performance? Are there things out there? Reliability in terms of collecting the evaluations from multiple sources and at different times throughout the period, because things can change. There are environmental things that change, both internal to the organization and external. The person who's being evaluated should have input, so they should be able to respond. There should be some flexibility because, again, situations change within the company, externally to the company. There could be change in regulation. There could be some change in resources for the business. There could be change in competition, that kind of thing. And there should be some level of equitableness or fairness, that it should be judged fairly against the criteria, regardless of what people's individual differences are. Okay, now this is a question that people are often asked, individual rewards or team rewards. There are positives and negatives to both, and both in terms of what you receive. So you might have more independent behavior, more creativity, and a little bit more competition. So people don't become just reliant on their coworkers if there's individual reward. And then team rewards encourages cooperation, information sharing of expertise. That's a team sport, that as a group we can go further than individually. Okay, so how can you correct poor performance? You have to figure out why it's happening, what the source is, and develop some sort of corrective plan of action, and always keeping things to be as a mutual decision as possible. And again, going back to those SMART goals, having things that are attainable, not asking an employee to do something that they're going to fail at because you're not going to give them the resources or it's impossible to do within a period of time. All right, and then finally, in this chapter we talk about mentoring. It's a work relationship that encourages development and career enhancement for people moving through the career cycle. So you'll often hear about mentors. It's usually someone who's similar to them, usually someone who's similar to them in terms of maybe what their background is, either in terms of gender or education or what their area of discipline is. Someone who can understand what they're doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone within your own unit, but it's someone who can really help you out and help you, quote unquote, see the ropes as you go through. It's important if you do have a mentor, it's a very valuable tool, but it's important that you pick your mentor properly. Okay, so that's a real quick look at performance learning and performance appraisal. I encourage you to read the book about that. There's a lot of detail about it. And as always, again, if you have any questions, please contact me. Thanks, everyone.